Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Subscription Scaled. I am your host, Nick Frederick. With me today is a special guest, very excited to speak with. We have Robbie Kellman Baxter, who is a consultant, a author, and a speaker on the subscription economy. Robbie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Nick.
Yeah. Well, I saw you speak, I think it was a little over 2 years ago at Subscription Show in Boston. Gave some great insights. I think your new book had just come out or was about to come out, The Forever Transaction. How long ago was that?
Yeah, so that event was, I think, in 2019, and the book had not come out yet, but
Okay.
it was the first time I presented the content.
Okay.
So really good memory. It was
Yeah.
it was fresh, and I was, I guess if I were a comedian, I'd say I was working on the material, getting comfortable.
Well, it came through great, and I could tell. I mean, you were definitely excited about it. Like this was like top of mind. To your point, you had just finished the book, so there was a lot of concepts there. But it was a great talk, and yeah, ever since then, been a fan, and I'm glad to have you on the show today.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Well, let's start with a basic question, just about subscriptions in general. Not a new concept, obviously, right? Subscriptions have been around, well, longer than I think I've been alive, AAA and going back to some of those clubs from way back when. What do you think about it is today in our digital and very remote world that makes subscriptions still so relevant?
Yeah, so you're totally right. I mean, subscriptions have been around forever. Charles Dickens wrote his books with subscription model. Book of the Month Club recently had its 100th anniversary. And I think what makes it so popular and continue to be so popular is recurring revenue, and getting closer to the customer. There's a moment in a subscription for a lot of customers where they actually stop behaving like a consumer considering alternatives and start behaving like a member, where they trust your organization to solve an ongoing problem. And that's attractive to the customer when it's done right, and it's very powerful for the company.
Right. Is it, do you think it's more consumers driving businesses to want to be subscription, or is it businesses saying, I love recurring revenue, therefore I'm going to try to impart that on my customers, or is it truly one of these things that just meet in the middle where it should be?
Well, we like to think it's meat in the middle, but I would say that certainly in the last 5 years, there's been kind of a gold rush mentality to subscription.
Right.
Technology, as you well know, because you're right in the middle of it, technology's made it easier than ever before for almost any kind of organization to offer goods and services as subscriptions. And, both the public and private markets have decided to value subscription revenue at a higher multiple than transactional revenue, which makes it really attractive to almost every kind of business.
Right. That's a great segue. Gold Rush is a great way to think about it because I've been doing subscription or in the industry in general for almost 20 years now. Back when the only way to really, from a technology perspective, to get in subscriptions was you had to build a lot of this stuff yourself. You had to go out and build the systems, the platforms, and then when the web came along, you had to build all your own. It was always starting from the ground up. And so recently, in probably the past 5 years, there's just been this proliferation of tools and services that you can get up and running with a subscription business in a matter of really hours, I think, at this point. So in that sense, what do you think about the landscape is different today than it was 5 or 10 years ago? And I guess off of that, where do you think it's going?
Yeah, well, so big question. Like you, I've been kind of in the subscription world for a pretty long time. And when I first started talking, I worked with Netflix, and then I worked with, Intuit, which was, small business oriented subscription software. I did some work with Oracle, so, more of a SaaS model. And I was seeing these patterns, and I saw how powerful subscriptions could be in terms of building deeper relationships with the customers. But when I talked to companies, they didn't necessarily see themselves in that trend. They didn't see how they could be part of it. And I think part of that was it was just too hard to do. And, even in the past, I wrote The Membership Economy in 2014. It came out in 2015. And I really wrote that book to share what I was seeing with my clients that were sort of on the cutting edge of a lot of different industries, and to say, hey, this is a really interesting framework through which you can look at any business model, and maybe it can work for you to build deeper relationships, higher customer value, and so on. 5 years later, I don't have to explain that to anybody, right? Everybody wants subscription revenue. It feels almost easy to them. They look at all these other companies and they say, I want some of that subscription revenue. What software do I need? I'm going to just price the stuff I have as a subscription, and I'm going to be off to the races, and the high valuation and the undisruptible connection with my customer. It should be easy, right? And I think that's part of, the combination of the demand on the investor side and the desire on the customer side. And I think to some extent, the understanding and acceptance of consumers and business buyers that subscription is a viable way of accessing services. I think all of that is converging right now. To make almost every business is thinking about subscriptions. In fact, I would say 99% of your listeners are probably either already implementing subscriptions, thinking about it, and definitely have competitors who have already implemented it pretty successfully.
So to summarize, a lot of those barriers of entry that, when you were transactional model and moving to subscription, it's now easier than ever to get into that and kind of dabble your feet in the water, or at least be able to perhaps be in both worlds at the same time, right? If you're a billion-dollar organization that's been transactional your whole existence, and now you're wanting to get over into subscription, you probably don't want to risk what's been working, right? You want to maybe try to dabble into that world, or at least make a more gradual transition. And rather than overhauling every system and every process, you can kind of play with some things in this new world that would have taken a much bigger investment in the past, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Technology is extending the infrastructure that enables trusted relationships. And it is definitely a lot easier for an organization that has a good idea about how to build a subscription to actually implement it and make it a reality without, as you said earlier, having to build all of the technology from scratch.
Another thing too, I would say, is when I first got into it, and I didn't even realize this was the case at the time, but there's certain ecosystem players that tend to focus more on recurring revenue, whether that's on the payment side or it's on the billing, or any of the other systems that are around it. I mean, there was a handful of merchant acquirers that used to not want to, but would focus on that sort of that sort of transaction. And now there's so many of them, so there were a limited number of players that would even talk to each other in that ecosystem. But now there's so many. Integration with APIs is easier than it's ever been, and it's almost like, well, now everybody talks to everybody, so it's a lot more seamless than it used to be. There's so many plugins and
Yeah,
things like that.
it's almost like that, but not exactly, which is
Yeah,
where the challenges come. It's like,
right.
wait, what do you mean this one doesn't talk with that one? I thought everything did. And you're like, well, most things do, but not everything. And I think that's one of the challenges for organizations is really thinking through first, what do you want the member journey to be? Somebody who's subscribing to your products or services, what are the experiences you want them to have? What are the different kind of moments of inflection where they could go deeper into your business or take a step back? And do you have the technology integrated in such a way that experience feels seamless, even if it goes across product lines or functional areas? The culture of subscription is really important.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's really one of the reasons that we even exist, is because, companies outgrow vanilla platforms and have more complicated use cases and need ways to solve those. Because, yes, there's a lot of platforms you can get up and running quickly and, start selling your product or service online in a recurring way. That's pretty easy to do. But as you grow in scale, go into new markets, diversify your product line, want to offer it in different ways, and differentiate yourself from some of that competition, because it is so easy to start up. Now you find yourselves into what I call walled gardens of, yeah, this is our platform, it works a certain way. You want to go outside of that, and it can be difficult. So that's just something you gotta consider too.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I always advise organizations to do, especially early on, is to think about, start with the simplest, but think about what is the path that your customer is going to take, and what are some of those different behaviors or different decisions that they might make. and to get those requirements down and say this is what we need to be able to enable for our subscribers, and then talk to vendors and talk to partners. And goodness knows, there's one of the good things about right now is there's lots and lots, there's no shortage of consultants and technology partners and solution providers. The real challenge is doing the heavy lifting up front of saying, what is the journey that we want to put them on, and what does that mean for us? A lot of times, I think about this in 3 stages: launch, scale, and lead. When an organization's in the launch phase, they're often doing this with what they already have, and kind of filling in the gaps. We always say with chewing gum and paper clips, but more often that's Excel spreadsheets and human labor. Mm-hmm. And then they figure it out, and they're like, okay, this works. This is the model that works. People like it. They're willing to pay for it. They stay. Now it's time, to pour the concrete on the rebar, right? Really make it solid. And, at that point, they really need to be much more operationally minded. The first phase is really entrepreneurial, I think. The second phase is really, you need a strong operator who really understands systems and consistency and patterns. And it's often a different team in the organization as it gets more complicated, and as the investments become more permanent and more high stakes.
Well, in that way, in your consulting experience, when you've been working with these organizations who are looking at the membership model, what are some things that you consistently see they're not prepared for or not thinking about in terms of how my organization needs to be structured in order to support this new way of really doing everything, right?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is having shared metrics. So saying that one team is responsible for acquisition and a different team is responsible for retention can lead to some really funny behaviors, right? People are nothing if not responsive to being measured, right? And I worked with one company where the acquisition team had great numbers and the retention team was doing a terrible job. And, the general manager was pretty close to ready to fire everybody on the retention team. We brought everybody into one room. So this was the acquisition team, the tech team, the product team. This was a streaming content company. The content team, the retention team, everybody came into one room, and we started to talk about it. And what the retention team said was, one of the challenges that we have when we're trying to retain somebody is a lot of people sign up for one title that we have, a really big movie title that everybody wants. And the ads say 2-week free trial. We have the biggest movie in the country. And so what do you think was happening? Everybody was signing up for the 2-week free trial, watching the best movie in the country, and canceling often before the first payment. So I think, kind of the most important thing is that, metrics need to be aligned, and teams need to work across functional areas. Looking at it from the customer's perspective, if you've ever had one of those experiences where you're on, talking to a customer support person and they're telling you that it's not their issue, it's the issue of another team, right? That's actually a technical issue. That's actually a problem with the sales organization. So you're going to have to take it up with them. And you're like, I don't care who it's a problem with. It's a problem with your company. And, I need help. I think that becomes even more important if you're trying to build a subscription, because it's about the relationship. And if you offer subscription, you're telling your customer, we have an ongoing relationship. And so the customer's expectations go up in terms of how well you understand them and recognize them.
That's a great point. And we've all been on that side of the fence, right? As a frustrated customer who gets to deal with an organization who just wants to pass you off to the next department and not have to deal with you anymore. I mean, we've all been there one degree or another. But within those organizations, and believe me, I've experienced this too, both being within the merchant and consulting as well. But bringing them into the room is great. But how do you get them to, somebody on the retention side to say, I care about the acquisition metrics? I mean, that's got to be so challenging.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just having those people, rub shoulders and understand kind of the different parts. It's somebody above them as a GM or a leader saying, I'm not going to judge the acquisition team exclusively on acquisition numbers. Sometimes as over time, they start to learn, we need to, like, I did work very early on at Netflix, and one of the things that was important is acquisition meant somebody who's never been part of Netflix before, right? That you can't be somebody who keeps coming back and getting the free trial, just as a small example. But that makes a big difference, right? Because somebody who's been there before is way less likely to engage than somebody who's coming in for the first time and having that free trial for the first time. Not letting people, if your goal is to retain people because we have a deep body of content, it's very risky to attract people based on one title, right? So changing the rules around what kind of messages you can use for acquisition. Because you want to get people who are going to, not just people who are going to sign up, which is often the goal of acquisition, but also who are going to sign up and stay. I see a lot of companies offering bonuses, after some retention period. You're responsible for acquisition, but you also get a bonus if they stay for more than X periods. So those are some of the things I think that can be done, but it starts with recognizing that you can't have a single metric for a single team. It has to be shared across the organization, and the whole organization has to be laser focused on where in the member journey the system is breaking. Is it that people are signing up for a free trial and then failure to launch, they never pay? Is it that they're paying and then they're staying for some finite period of time and then canceling too early because they've used up all the benefits? Or is it that they're using it for a little while and then bumping up into a wall where the product no longer solves a problem and they feel like, oh, this product or subscription is not solving my problem, they're letting me down? Understanding where the problem is a failure to onboard, where they join and they stay for a little while but they never actually use all the features and benefits they're entitled to. If you can tell where the problem is, it's a lot easier to figure out the remedy.
Absolutely. But you got to have metrics, right? If you don't have those data points, and then you can't get everybody who represents them in the room to talk it through, you're kind of just grasping at straws, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. With bigger companies, they generally have too many metrics, not enough metrics, and so part of the question is to help them figure out which metrics really matter and trying to take lots of data and simplify it. But I've found that even with smaller companies, just by starting to ask these questions, you can often, it's kind of like level one, the low-hanging fruit is like just noticing, like, oh, you're like the example I gave you, oh, we're marketing one title and people are canceling after only watching one show. What do you think is going on? You don't need a ton of data to have a pretty educated guess. But I think that what pretty quickly happens is, you get more and more sophisticated, and you need the nuanced understanding of what's going on.
On the point of data, one of my favorite examples is when I started going to industry conferences, we were managing what we called our collection rate. All of the customers that we were billing on an ongoing basis each month or each billing period, how successful were we at collecting from everybody we had to bill? And we'd go to conferences and we'd talk to others, and they would start saying, well, my collection rate is X on credit card or X, Y on ACH. And we'd go, wow, that seems odd. And so you start diving into it and you realize I'm talking about oranges and you're talking about hand grenades.
Yeah.
Because, you might be looking at each individual attempt to collect the payment. But if you're recycling, are you looking at it collectively? It's just all of those different nuances can point to some very different conclusions if you're not careful about, well, what are we actually measuring here?
Yeah, exactly. And there's a couple of things that I think are really important that you said. One of them is be careful who you compare yourself to, right? As my mother said, people lie, first of all, and also, people have different metrics, different scales, right? I might weigh 10 pounds less at the gym than I weigh at home, right? Which is why I weigh myself at the gym, but it's so. I mean, I think that's important. Is that when you're talking to somebody that's in a different organization, as they say to you as my doctor says to me, it doesn't matter if you weigh more at the gym or less at the gym. What matters is from week to week on any particular scale, what direction. It's all right. It's all about that kind of ongoing thing. So that's the first thing that's really important. And then the second thing that you said, which is if you're measuring, so sometimes you can just be measuring different things, and as long as you're tracking trends, you're okay. But sometimes you're measuring something that's really not giving you the information you need to make better decisions. because you're not, and I see that a lot of times with organizations, even really big, sophisticated organizations that don't understand which metrics drive subscription success. So, for example, they over-index on acquisition, they over-index on quarterly revenue, as opposed to really looking at it on a cohort basis,
Okay.
or looking at it from a unit economics basis. Where the revenue looks really big, but that's because they're spending a lot of money on acquisition, and the customers are leaving before you break even on any one customer.
Yeah.
That can happen to really pretty sophisticated people who just haven't thought through what it means to have subscription revenue. And I think that is also a huge issue right now with investors, right? And with the various accounting standards boards who haven't really caught up with this subscription economy, the trends around subscriptions. So, what I hope to see is, standard data requirements for how you do your reporting, which I think will both certainly help the investors to understand what's going on, but it'll also help organizations to get a better read on what's going on in their organizations. And it'll also help subscription professionals if they want to go from company to company, because they'll show up like the way that accountants do. They'll show up and say, I understand what's going on in this business. I can immediately get to work because I have a read. The dashboard makes sense to me. I don't have to, a lot of people go to a new company and the first thing they have to do is understand the actual formulas under the dashboard before they can get to work.
Right.
which slows everybody down.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. Experienced that myself. Was working with a client who, by the time you looked at the cost per lead that they were paying, the spiff that they were paying to acquire a new member to a third party who was helping them to service that particular product, and then on the back end, the cost to service a chargeback that might come in or something like that, and you added all of this up, you're like, you guys have never made money on this product line, like ever. So we
Yeah.
really need to change some things or think about, maybe going in a completely different direction. But it's just interesting how sometimes all of those dots don't get connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's bad. It's funny. It's bad certainly for investors and outsiders who are trying to understand the business, but it's really bad internally too, because you're making you believe that you have a good business and it turns out that you don't, and it takes a while for that to catch up with you. So I do think that there's a real need for consistency around metrics and analytics for businesses relying on recurring revenue.
Well, switching gears a little bit here, I think in the past, during the gold rush, as you called it, we've seen a lot of just outside the box thinking when it comes to like a membership program that you would have just never thought of. Like, there's car subscriptions, I've seen vacuum cleaner subscriptions, and now there's furniture and all of these new things. Um, what are there any in particular verticals that stick out in your mind as like, yeah, this is ripe for subscription transformation? And are there any where you're seeing them come out and go, I just don't think this is going to work? Or is that even possible for subscription?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the areas that I think are ripe for subscription, and they're just, we're seeing examples, but it's not the dominant business model. Manufacturing, agriculture, and healthcare, all have different issues. I think manufacturing and agriculture, because they are, there's so much equipment involved, there's so much data involved. I think they're just, it's taking a while to have that happen. Plus, if you bought your heavy equipment 5 years ago, you're not going to be coming back on the market to buy anything anytime soon. So, even if they're interested in the new model, you may have to wait a while for your customers to come to you. And there's great risk, and they're always thinking about next year's crops, and they can't think that far into the future. But I do think it's we're starting to see things with different subscriptions that like mitigate risk on your crops. So you spend more for premium chemicals, but if the weather is bad this year, you get your money back. Or you look at the Caterpillar and John Deere, where they have a lot of subscription services wrapped around the machinery, and are kind of publicly moving toward a model where you subscribe to the machine rather than owning it outright. There's some models for sharing, economy kinds of subscription models with equipment that you might only need once or twice a year. And on the manufacturing side, same thing. There's a company here in Silicon Valley, Carbon 3D, which is they make 3D printers and different kinds of resins for the molds. You can't own one of their printers. You have to subscribe to them. And, the printer might be on site, but you're subscribing to it, and it's collecting and sending data back to the mothership so that you can benchmark your usage, make sure you're getting the best value, make sure that the resins you're using are the ones that are optimized for the actual designs, providing a lot of additional value beyond the printer itself. So, there's, and then the whole healthcare world, everything from, the pills, right? The pharmaceuticals to medical devices that you subscribe to instead of owning, smart medical devices, and then services, we're seeing, everything from, weight loss to menopause to depression are all being, there are entrepreneurs that are attempting to solve those ongoing problems with subscriptions. So it's a really exciting time, and there's a lot going on in a lot of really surprising areas.
Yeah. I like what you said at the beginning there. More consumers are starting to accept that they might be paying a premium, but they're also paying a premium to reduce the risk, right? Because you're really
Yeah.
offloading risk onto another organization that if something goes wrong, they're the ones that are going to bear probably the brunt of it. And that's worth something, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like this morning, I was talking to someone from the agriculture world. You can tell I've got that on my brain today. And one of the things that he was saying was, people, the company wants to sell seeds. We have these seeds, but the farmer wants to buy successful crops. Right? I don't really want to buy seeds. I want to buy a guarantee that my crops are going to be successful. That's why I spend more on your seeds than someone else's seeds. That's why I pay for this fertilizer or this chemical or use this machine. And the better, this is true of any business, the more closely you can align the bundle of benefits that you're offering in your services with the goal of your customer, especially the ongoing goal, which is kind of the name of the game in subscriptions, the more likely they are to sign up for it and to stay, right? That you recognize their goal, what are you promising them that is justifying their loyalty to you?
That seems to make a whole lot of sense in agriculture, right? Because the biggest thing that keeps people from going into farming, or a lot of them from leaving it, it's just the ups and downs, right? The fantastic year down to the next year, and everything gets wiped out, and just dealing with the stress and the financial implications that comes with that. So I would think they would be a segment that would be very interested in sharing that risk among its ecosystem partners.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, are there any subscription models coming out or being considered that you're in the back of your mind, you're like, I'm not sure this really makes sense for subscription?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Okay.
The way, and it's not so much, this industry shouldn't look at subscriptions. It's, if your company or your organization is not making an ongoing promise that they're solving an ongoing problem or helping to achieve an ongoing goal, you have not earned the right to have a subscription. And so it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Nobody needs, let's say, a subscription to a wedding dress, right? We might need a subscription to Rent the Runway that provides us with the right outfit for the right occasion, right? That is an ongoing challenge that people have, or an ongoing goal, right? I want to look appropriate and attractive for a broad variety of occasions. But a wedding dress is not for most of us, is not an ongoing need, right? And this is a silly.
You probably don't need a
right. So she has it's a very small target market for that particular offering. But it's the same. I remember being at a subscription conference a few years ago, and someone came up to me and was telling me how hard it had been for them to be successful with subscriptions, and how people were only subscribing for 1 or 2 months and then canceling. So they were thinking of having an annual subscription and forcing people to stick around for the first year. And I said, oh, well, what's your subscription? And she said, we have a methodology for potty training toddlers. Right. And if you've ever potty trained toddlers, you know that it takes hopefully it does not take more than a couple of months because, otherwise, you probably are going to go away and say, something's wrong, or I'll come back to it later. But it was a great case of the product and the promise not justifying a subscription. And I see this all the time, collections of content where the amount of content is very small or really designed around a finite use, like, content to help somebody get up to speed in the world of sales, right? Well, you might be getting up to speed in the world of sales for 3 months, 6 months, but not forever. At some point, you become pretty sophisticated, or at least you think you are. So I think there's a lot of businesses where they just want subscription revenue, but they don't do the work of, kind of taking a step back and saying, what kind of benefits would we need to offer to justify an ongoing relationship? We can't just take the products we've always had and just start charging them on a subscription basis without really optimizing something around making it better for the customer.
So do you think then there's a place for not hybrid models, but offering both models? And an example I can give is one that just frustrated me. I had a video I wanted to edit. I just wanted to edit a video. I had one video. I knew I would only have one video, and I searched the web for, can I just buy, something that for a week or to do one, output one video. I could find nothing. They were all subscription. And so I went in knowing that you're only allowing me to do this. I am absolutely 100% going to cancel this, but it's the only option you're giving me.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, I did. And sure enough, they took me through a very complicated save flow. We'll discount this 75% to keep you. And I'm like, that's great. Still don't need it. 25% isn't worth it for me. So is that something to consider?
Yeah. And in fact, I think you've put your finger on one of the biggest reasons for subscription fatigue with consumer. Well, two of them, actually. One of them is lack of product market fit. You're a person who has a discrete one-time need to use something, and you're being forced to subscribe, even though you obviously don't need that. And the second thing is hiding the cancel button, right? Or metaphorically. Right. And those are two things that I think are really contributing. You've been in subscriptions a long time. There was a period, 15, 10, even 5 years ago, where when you tell somebody you were in the subscription business, their eyes would glaze over and they'd try to, move to the next person because it wasn't relevant to them. Now, at least for me, when I tell somebody that I, am in the subscription space, the first thing that they do is they tell me their horror story. Oh, I had to subscribe to this thing I didn't want to, but I had to, so I canceled and this and that. And I've been subscribing to this for 3 months and I never used it and I can't get my money back. Everybody has a bad story, and that's because of the bad actors and the subscription models that are designed not necessarily to build an ongoing relationship, but to either lock someone in to something that they don't need, or to make it really hard for them to leave, even if it's the right thing for them to do.
Well, back in the day, there was a strategy of set it and forget it, where you would try to get an acquisition, you would try to put it at a price point where when it showed up on their monthly statement, bank statement or credit card statement, it was small enough that even if they questioned, I don't remember what this is, it wasn't enough to really do something about. Like that was kind of the strategy at some point with sub businesses, was just, let's just go out there, try to acquire as many as we can. We'll plan for an attrition curve, but it'll still be worth it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people who've been in, I think that was especially true in the sort of world of continuity programs, where starting with a TV ad, but wait, there's more. And if you sign up right now, you get, coffee delivered to your home for the rest of your life, pounds and pounds and pounds. And, Columbia and BMG, they had those, 12 CDs for a penny.
Taste a penny on your postcard.
But then, yeah, but it was very hard to cancel. I think there's a lot of people that want to, kind of separate themselves from that, and they don't want to use the phrase continuity program, because for people that have been in this business a long time, it kind of brings to mind this bad behavior that used to be acceptable. And I think it's not acceptable now for a couple of reasons. The biggest being, there's the ethical part, which is who really wants to be in a business where the only reason you're making money is because your customers can't figure out how to get away from you, even though they hate you.
Yeah.
And that's just a hard place to be. It's not fun. It's a hard reason to get up in the morning. People are much more mission driven these days. And I think the second thing, which is the more cynical view, is that we have access to better and faster information and transparency. So if I create a subscription and you sign up for it and I lock you in and treat you badly and have hidden fees and make it hard for you to cancel, you're going to tell your friends, you're going to post about it, you're going to tweet about it, you're going to set up a website about it. There's, the repercussions happen much more quickly and much more effectively. So I think companies have to be really, really careful about treating people badly. And I would say most subscriptions, if you call them and you say, hey, I haven't used your product in a month and I tried to cancel and I just missed the cutoff, most of them will give you your money back.
I will say, and this has been fantastic to hear with so many guests that I've had on the podcast of founders of companies, they talk again and again about, I am glad to cancel people because the last thing I want is a customer who is paying a monthly fee to me, not using the service, and going to cancel at some point, but then they're going to be left with a bad taste in their mouth of, yeah, I signed up for that thing, I forgot about it, didn't use it, or this sat on a shelf, whatever the product was. They would much rather you cancel, stay in good graces, stay in contact, and if and when you need that sort of product again, you're top of mind again. It's
Yeah.
certainly changed from what I called, set and forget now to the engagement model and providing that ongoing benefit and community and all of the things that great subscription companies do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You hit on subscription fatigue there, and I want to come back to that because we talk about all of these great, verticals that are ripe for subscription, but subscription fatigue is already a thing. So as we add more and more options out there, more and more consumers sign up for things. What do you think that's going to do? There's certainly the consumers now understand the benefits of subscription. They understand better how to manage them, and the general feeling about subscriptions has changed. But we can only take so many, right? So where do you see that going, and how will consumers get a better handle on all of the different subscriptions that they have?
Yeah, well, we're seeing it happen right now. There's a lot of companies, um, you know, independent companies like Truebill and Trim, as well as major banks. Example, Wells Fargo's what is it called? Not contact center, command tower. I can't think of what it's
I
called
know
now.
what you're talking about. I can't remember the name of it either.
Um, but they're coming up with basically apps that protect you from your subscriptions. They either will cancel on your behalf, negotiate on your behalf, help you understand what you're paying for. And they're doing that to help because consumers are so exhausted by all the subscriptions. I think of subscriptions having kind of three reasons for subscription fatigue. The two of them we've talked about. One of them is lack of product market fit. That is, this bundle of benefits is not what I need on an ongoing basis. The second one is we talked about, hiding the cancel button. And the third one is subscription guilt, which is what we're talking about now, or subscription overwhelm, which is I have so many subscriptions. I don't think they're bad. I think they're all good subscriptions. It's just I can't keep track of it. And I feel bad that I'm not using them. And so I think if you are just coming into the world of subscriptions, or even if you've been here for a while, you have to think about that's the market you're playing in. Is that when you tell a consumer we're offering a subscription, they're going to ask themselves, is this what I need? Right? Or are they forcing me into a subscription, like your example with the editing software? Am I going to forget I have this and not use it? Or have the value pile up like the New Yorker effect, right? Where I love it. It's a great magazine. The content is amazing, but I can't keep up with it. That kind of subscription overwhelm or subscription guilt, where I feel bad that I'm not using really good subscriptions that I'm paying for. And then, hiding the cancel button. So if you're in the world of subscriptions, you want to think to yourself, am I doing anything with my subscription model that might be driving my subscribers or prospects to kind of raise a red flag about one of those three drivers of subscription fatigue?
So with that fatigue and with so many recurring charges showing up on your bank statements now, and if nothing else, a consumer going, wait a minute, from a budget perspective, I can't have these 10 subscriptions. I need to cancel three or four, or whatever. Does that then create some opportunities for bundling and maybe like or complementary services coming together and offering, a few things together, maybe in a different form or package at a price that's, comes in below what they would be paying individually?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of room. I mean, there's lots of different paths you can take. The thing about bundling is it's a way to layer in enough value to really make a big dent in either an ongoing problem or an ongoing goal in such a way that the customer can do what you want them to do when they become a subscriber, which is relax into the subscription and say, I can trust this organization. Like they really, there's enough content in this bundle of streaming benefits, or there's enough educational content in this bundle of professional development tools, or, there's enough, restaurants in this, restaurant delivery subscription that it makes sense for me. And those bundles can be done by adding features internally, develop product development. It can be done by partnering with another company. You can partner with a company for your content or your product, but you can also partner with them for distribution. So making it easier for them to pay for everything at once. The one that comes to mind for a lot of people is, Apple, right? It's very nice that all of our, subscription apps are under one umbrella. But those of us who've been in the subscription business a while know that, Apple takes a very big bite out of the revenue.
Yep.
A really big chunk. And it's not always even easier for the consumer to cancel because their cancel flow is a little bit complicated. But, as much as people complain about the aggregators and being bundled and how it disintermediates them sometimes from their subscriber, it's also an incredible way to reach more people and to provide your service alongside the other services that really help your customers achieve their big goals.
Don't you think that cable and satellite providers, the way that industry has evolved, is the perfect example of we all complained about these giant packages with a whole bunch of channels that we didn't watch. And then cord cutting came in, and I could stream all of this stuff individually, and I would only have to choose and pay for the ones that I actually wanted and used. And now we are going right back the other way because everybody's got a service with at least one thing that you really want, or they're being bundled together like the ESPN, Hulu, Disney type thing. And it feels like, well, from at least from a total price perspective, I'm right back to where I was, maybe even more than I was paying before.
Yeah, oh, exactly. I mean, it's like we've gone from kind of one end of the spectrum all the way to the other, from the forced bundle, like you said, of the cable providers, all the way to the cutting the cord and the unbundling, back to, wow, it actually is easier to have, one bill, everything I need in one place, a discount for the volume, one person to call. And I think it's the same with subscriptions. I love subscriptions, and I think they're a very effective tool for building ongoing relationships, but it's not the only tool. What's great about subscription is it's a way for a company to change their focus to being more committed to solving the ongoing problem, to better aligning their pricing structure with the value they're driving. And subscription is often a good way to do it. In your case with the editing software, it wasn't for your use case. You would have been better off with a one-time fee, right? And I think that organizations, I don't know that any one pricing structure is going to solve everybody's needs. That's why there's always going to be different bundles of benefits, different price points, different ways of getting value. Some people want to own a car. Some people don't want to own a car because they have nowhere to park. Some people don't want to own a car because they don't need it very often. Some people don't want to own a car because they need different models all the time, or because they always want a new car. And, each one of those different use cases has become some kind of different offering, whether it's, leasing or Uber or, car sharing like Turo, or, the models of, Volvo, Porsche, and all of the other car subscription companies. What they're doing really well is optimizing for different objectives, different consumer or customer needs. And that's what I think is really important about all of this, is that ultimately it's designed in service to the need for the customer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And everybody today and consumers expect that you're going to tailor their experience to your product or service to exactly what they want or need. I mean, that's just kind of the competitive landscape, right? We've almost trained consumers to think that way, that I'm going to give you, exactly what you need or offer it to you in a very customized way, which is good because there's a lot of tools that enable that, but it also just creates business complexity, right? I now have to support all of these
Yeah.
different ways that you want to
Yeah.
engage with me, and that kind of flies in the face of trying to make things simple and efficient, and now towards, okay, I've got all of these different cohorts of customers that I have to treat in very different ways. So is there good strategies for how to balance those two things and figure out the right mix?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, when I first started in the subscription world, I'll just confess this. I really believed that you were either a subscription based business or you weren't. Either you were part of the membership economy or you weren't. And, Netflix was, but, Disney wasn't, because they were selling all different kinds of things. And I've really come around on that to say, it can work really well. Companies can do very well as a hybrid, having a lot of different pricing structures and a lot of different tiered offerings. But what I always say to organizations is to think really hard before you add a new SKU, especially in the world of subscriptions, before you add a different, upfront offer, a different bundle of benefits, a different price point, because the more complicated your pricing model, especially in subscriptions, the less your customer trusts you, because the more you're asking them to become an expert on your products and pricing, right? Like if you've ever tried to negotiate, let's say with a telco, right, with a mobile phone service, and they're explaining to you, well, how much data do you want, and how many lines do you want, and do you want to have a vanity phone number, and do you, how many minutes, and which cities are you calling? How many cities do you want to have a discount for? And you're like, wow, I really need to write all of this down and analyze it, because if I don't, I'm not going to get a fair deal. And the minute the customer feels like they're not going to get a fair deal, they put on their consumer hat, they feel adversarial towards you, and they aren't going to relax into trusting you with a subscription. So what I would say to organizations is just proceed with caution. Try to stick with one model and see, make sure you understand that first. And as you layer in other options, make sure you're really clear about who they're for and why they wouldn't be well served with what you already have.
That is really good advice. I've dealt with more than one organization that had multiple product lines, and beneath that, different versions of each one of those products that they're offering in different markets. And sometimes it was the same product, slightly packaged a different way and offered at a different price point because they wanted to market it a different way. So I'm like, you are asking for customers to not trust you, right? Because if they
Right.
if they realize all of these are really one and the same, to your point, that's just not the transparency that consumers expect today.
Right. And what they'll do is they'll say, "Wow, this is too complicated. I'm gonna take a beat and go.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll come back."
Hmm.
It's not to say don't have multiple offers, but make it easy for the buyer to buy. Make it easy for them to trust you. Have them see like, oh, this is the offer. Oh, if you have kids, this is the right option. Oh, if you live in New Jersey, this is the right option. Oh, if you work at home, this is the package for you. And to really continue to be very focused on becoming an expert at the ongoing needs of a particular group, and to be really rigorous about what the bar is for introducing a new offering.
Good advice. Definitely good advice. Well, Robbie, I still have a lot of questions left, but I don't want to take your entire day. So maybe we'll have to save this for another episode down the road. But I just want to say thank you so much for all that you shared today. I mean, very great advice, very good perspective. If any of the listeners out there want to get in contact with you, have some questions, maybe want to engage, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm really easy to find. RobbieKellmanBaxter.com.
Well, that's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Yeah, so the membership economy, the forever transaction, two books that are out there that I would highly recommend. Any opportunity anyone would get to listen to you speak, also a good opportunity. But Robbie, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Really appreciate
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun to talk to you.
it. Great. Hopefully we'll do it again sometime down the road. Take care.